Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Looking at our portion, we finally move away from all the laws and sacrifices, and it gives us something pleasanter to talk about. And it starts with the following 1.5 verses. וידבר אדוני אל משה בהר סיני לאמור. דבר אל בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, כי תבואו אל הארץ אשר אני נותן לכם. So first we're told that Adonai spoke to Moses on Sinai. So all the other laws don't come from there? No. How dare you say that? This is precisely to remind us that everything was given to Moses on Sinai. Never forget that. Second, we're told about the land that I have given you. But isn't that obvious? No, says Nechama Leibovich, we need a constant reminder that Adonai was the one who gave us our land, lest we forget. And if after all the sacrifices we have fallen asleep, these two questions are sure to wake us up. In the first section, the sabbatical year, the Shmitah is discussed. It is a year when the land must lie fallow. These laws appear 3 times in the Torah. First in Exodus 23, second here in Leviticus 25, and finally in Deuteronomy 15. The name Shmitah is first mentioned in Exodus and then in Deuteronomy, but not here in our portion. Shmitah comes from the root shin mem tet, shamat, to drop. Thus, in Deuteronomy, the debts will be dropped, or a remission of debts, and presumably this is why in Exodus we have a remission, so to speak, of cultivating the land. There are interesting differences between the 3 places the sabbatical year is mentioned. In our portion, in verse 6, we are told that we may eat from what grows on the land as long as we haven't planted it. Indeed, we may, or must, share it with the poor and the strangers. Exodus, on the other hand, prohibits eating from what happens to be growing, leaving it entirely to the poor, and what is left over to foraging animals, while Deuteronomy doesn't even bother to mention letting the land lie fallow. According to Plaut, Exodus tells us that we must leave what happens to grow during the Shmitah year to the poor, and Leviticus seems to further clarify this by saying that the landowner and the landless pauper are on equal footing when it comes to enjoying what grows spontaneously on the land during the Shmitah year. Deuteronomy, on the other hand, is much more concerned with the cancelling of debts, which is mentioned neither in Exodus nor in Leviticus. Our portion is also concerned with the cancelling of debts, but only in the Jubilee year, the 50th year. Both Leviticus and Deuteronomy give the Shmitah year the title of Shabbat, which Exodus does not mention. Having said that, when the land lies fallow, the owner is more likely to accrue debts, so there is a connection between the two which ties all 3 passages together. In various rabbinic sources, namely in the Mishnah, the Tractate Shvi'it, and the Palestinian Talmud, we are told that the Shmitah year was mostly observed in the land of Israel, barring a few exceptions. In the time of Rabbi Yanai, he allowed cultivating the land during the Shmitah year, since the Roman rulers of the time exacted heavy taxes from the people. And unlike most Roman rulers, as you mentioned earlier, David, who didn't. But that never became the norm, and indeed the Shmitah year still remains in force for Orthodox Jews in the land of Israel. It is not observed in the diaspora, obviously. It is interesting to note that the Shmitah year occurs every 7th year. The unveils, the Jubilee, is the year following the 7 times 7th year, and this reminds us of the Omer, which we're observing at the moment, being in the 37th day of the Omer. It is also the 7th week we read from Leviticus, though this does not work when we have a leap year. 7 is a popular, possibly mystical number, possibly the number of perfection. Our tradition abounds with 7s. The best known is, of course, Shabbat, the 7th and final day of the week, the day of rest. If we look at Genesis chapter 1, where the creation is described, it begins with a verse of 7 words. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Verse 2 has 14, or twice 7 words. V'haaretz hayta tohu vavohu v'choshech al pnei tehom v'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. We then have 7 paragraphs for the 7 days. It contains the words kitov, and it was good, 7 times. The final description of Shabbat contains 3 verses, each of 7 words. So verse 2 in chapter 2 has 2 sections of 7 words each, and verse 3 has a first section of 7 words. And I'm sure you all remember it. ויכל אלוהים ביום השביעי מלאכתו אשר עשה, that's the first one. וישבות ביום השביעי מכל מלאכתו אשר עשה, the second one. And finally, ויברך אלוהים את יום השביעי ויקדש אותו. In total, verses 1 to 3 describing the Shabbat have 35 words, where 35 is 5 times 7. The word for luck in Hebrew, mazal, has a value of 77, and another word for luck, gad, has a value of 7. The menorah in the temple has 7 branches. There are altogether 7 ancestors, 3 fathers and 4 mothers. And the ex-biblical writings, we have 7. And sadly, 7 days of mourning. And funnily enough, in our portion in chapter 25, verse 2b to 7, which discusses the Shmitah, the words from the root shin bet taf, the root of Shabbat itself, appear 7 times. This is surely no coincidence. The section itself, from the middle of verse 2, is written in a poetic style, where there is equal weight given to the field and to the vineyard. The positive instructions have the verb followed by the direct object, whereas the negative instructions have the direct object followed by the negative verb. This can be seen in the text if it is read as a poem. ושבתה הארץ לאדוני, 6 שנים תזרע שדך, ו6 שנים תזמור כרמך, ואספת את תבואתה. ובשנה השביעית שבת שבתון יהיה לארץ, שבת לאדוני. שדך לא תזרע, ואת ענבי נזירך לא תבצור, שנת שבתון יהיה לארץ. והייתה שבת הארץ לכם לאוכלה, לך ולעבדך ולאמתך, ולשכירך ולתושביך הגרים עמך. Does this all come from God, or was it written by people using a godly inspiration? It seems to me that one thing is certain. It was all carefully thought through, and it is for us to find the pleasure of discovering all the nuances. Shabbat Shalom.